From the day I was born, I felt the weight of being an afterthought. My older sister was hailed as the miracle, the beloved child who could do no wrong, while I was treated like a mere addition to the household. In a perfect world, parents would spread their love equally among their children, but my world was far from perfect. Instead, I was forced to live in the long shadow of a golden child, whose every whim was indulged and celebrated. For years, I thought that was simply how life worked. I believed I had to accept my role as the lesser daughter. But as I grew older, the relentless favoritism went from a faint ache in my chest to a searing pain that nearly consumed me. It wasn't just the glaring differences in birthday parties or the fact that my sister always got the last slice of cake. It was a constant battle to have my voice heard, a daily reminder that my needs were secondary. Over time, all this tension built up inside me, until finally, one monumental event forced everything into the open, my wedding day. And that showdown revealed just how far my parents and sister would go to ensure I stayed in her shadow. Keep watching, because what began as a one-sided rivalry turned into a wedding day disaster so shocking, it still makes me shake with both rage and a twisted sense of triumph. Sometimes the only way to break free is to fight fire with fire. And believe me, I lit that flame. Even as a toddler, I recognized my parents' unusual devotion to my older sister. They'd rock her to sleep with lullabies so sweet while I got rush tuck-ins, if I was lucky. Family albums were overloaded with photos of her first steps, her first words, her everything. If I had a milestone coming up, my first day at preschool, a little piano recital, it was overshadowed because my sister had either just achieved something or was about to. The imbalance wasn't just noticeable, it was glaring. Whenever I tried to point out that something felt unfair, I was met with gentle scolding or outright dismissal. My mother would shake her head, telling me not to be so selfish or to be more considerate of my sister's feelings. My father would offer half-hearted apologies, followed by excuses like, "But she's older and needs more attention right now." I learned over time not to complain because nobody listened. It might sound like typical sibling dynamics so far, but trust me, it was different. The way my sister soaked up praise and manipulated every situation in her favor went beyond normal rivalry. It was a taste of the chaos she would unleash as we grew up. Despite being so young, I sensed that I needed to find happiness outside my parents' gaze. I spent hours outdoors, climbing trees or making up stories in my head, pretending I was part of a different family, a loving, supportive one where I wasn't constantly measured against my sister's impossible standard. Sometimes my only real solace was that I had cousins and a few friends who treated me like an equal. Holidays would arrive, bringing with them hopes of togetherness, but even then, my sister found ways to claim the spotlight. Birthdays were an especially painful reminder of my place in the family hierarchy. We were born in the same month, which could have been wonderful. Instead, my parents insisted on celebrating our birthdays together, effectively turning my birthday into an extension of hers. She chose the cake flavor, the party venue, and sometimes even insisted that my gifts be smaller because it's really my special day, not hers. If I dared mention feeling hurt, my parents responded with weary sighs about how difficult I was being. By the time I was 6, a small, unspoken seed of resentment had already taken root. If my parents could dismiss something as fundamental as my birthday, what else would they disregard? The answer, as it turned out, was everything, and that seed would keep growing, fed by countless slights and heartbreaks. Starting elementary school brought a whole new arena for the golden child dynamic to unfold. My sister was a year ahead of me. Teachers who had adored her would see my last name and exclaim, "Oh, you're her sister! She was such a joy to have in class." I quickly realized that in their eyes, my sister was the standard I would be held to. Yet no matter how well I did, they never seemed to light up the way they did for her. Once, during a parent-teacher conference, my teacher complimented me on my reading skills. My sister happened to be lurking in the hallway, and the moment we stepped out, she ran to my parents, complaining that no one ever praised her reading so enthusiastically. My father immediately pulled the teacher aside, ironically demanding an explanation about why my sister wasn't equally celebrated that day. The teacher stammered, caught off guard, and ended up qualifying her praise for me, mumbling about how both girls are great readers. In less than a minute, my only shining moment that semester was reduced to a forgettable platitude. You might assume this was the kind of meddling that only overzealous parents do, but trust me, my sister orchestrated every step. She knew exactly how to turn even my small accomplishments into moments for herself, and my parents always took her side. It reached a point where I started fading into the background. If the teacher didn't praise me publicly, my sister had nothing to complain about. If I purposely failed to raise my hand in class, my parents would storm in demanding a reason their golden child wasn't the brightest star in the building. This pattern, me diminishing myself to keep the peace, became a habit that lasted far too long. Yet, ironically, my teachers sometimes recognized my potential in subtle ways. I'd get placed in advanced reading groups or asked to solve more challenging math problems. I remember the pang of regret each time I performed well in these hidden corners of the classroom, because I knew deep down that if my parents found out, the friction would escalate at home. It was a twisted existence, excelling in secret while feigning mediocrity in public to avoid stoking my sister's jealousy. Looking back, I realize how unfair it was that my childhood innocence was so thoroughly invaded by my sister's need for dominance. When a child has to mask their own abilities just to keep the peace, it's a recipe for deep-rooted resentment. And resentful I became, even if it took years for me to admit it. My extended family offered the only real glimpses of normalcy. Aunts, uncles, and cousins treated me as an individual, not just the other sister. They laughed at my jokes, asked about my interests, and sometimes gave me small gifts that were distinctly mine. My sister occasionally tried to barge in, demanding the same attention, but my cousins were less tolerant of her antics than my parents were. They saw right through her manipulative ways. One day, at a large family gathering, my sister cornered me near the buffet table. With a smug grin, she threatened to tell my parents I had eaten a forbidden treat. We had some weird household rules about sweets, unless I gave her my seat at the adults' table. Tired of her bullying, I let out a frustrated shout. A few of my older cousins overheard and demanded to know why I was upset. Hesitant, I finally broke down, explaining all the small and big ways she tormented me, like forcing me to let her pick out my clothes or insisting that I do her chores. That was the first time anyone outside my parents truly saw a glimpse of what I was living with. And for once, there were consequences that didn't fall on me. My aunt confronted my parents, and my father tried to brush it off as children being children, but my aunt stood her ground. The aftermath was jarring. My parents were furious that I'd embarrassed them by complaining in front of relatives. They accused me of being dramatic and exaggerating, yet something was different this time. Other adults began noticing the dynamic. A cousin whispered to me that I was always welcome at her house if I needed a break. Another aunt, disturbed by what she'd witnessed, tried to mediate, suggesting my parents treat us equally. For a brief moment, I hoped things might change. But once the extended family returned to their homes, life at our house resumed its familiar pattern. My sister was the golden child, and I was the scapegoat who got in trouble for protesting. If anything, my parents doubled down on their favoritism, as though making an example out of me. And my sister capitalized on that. Her bullying escalated, especially behind closed doors, in the small moments where only I could see her twisted smile. I learned a bitter lesson from that. Exposure alone wasn't enough. My parents might feel shame when called out, but they'd recover quickly and blame me all the more. The only real way to change my life would be to break free entirely, to leave the household they controlled so tightly. And that realization planted a new seed, a glimmer of hope that I might someday escape. As we both entered our teens, the weight of my sister's interference grew heavier. She had developed a flair for drama, faking tears or outrage whenever I got even the slightest attention from friends. My parents, never questioning her motives, believed every word that slipped from her mouth, and her words were often daggers pointed straight at my reputation. If she sensed I liked a boy, she'd claim he made her uncomfortable. If I formed a close friendship, she'd spread rumors that my friend was a bad influence. Desperate for any normalcy, I tried to spend more time outside the home. But my parents, swayed by my sister's stories, enforced stricter curfews and tighter restrictions on my whereabouts. The turning point came when I got my first real boyfriend. He was sweet and unassuming, everything I needed in that tumultuous time. The moment he set foot in my house to meet my parents, my sister latched onto him, flirting openly, wearing skimpy outfits, making veiled remarks about me being too serious. It was maddening. Here I was, finally experiencing the shaky thrill of young love, only to have my sister prance in, determined to steal or spoil it. The tension that followed would show me just how far she was willing to go, and how easily my parents would enable her. My boyfriend told me he felt deeply uncomfortable around her. She'd conveniently appear whenever we tried to have a private conversation in the living room, or she'd corner him in the kitchen with bizarre questions about his intentions, all while batting her eyelashes. At first, I thought maybe I was overreacting. But then he sat me down and confessed my sister had propositioned him, whispering that I wasn't experienced enough for someone like him. When I confronted my parents, they scoffed. My sister spun a sob story. Apparently, he had tried to come on to her, and she had bravely refused him because she could never betray me like that. Their solution? They demanded I break up with him. According to them, I had shown poor judgment in picking a guy who'd flirt with my innocent sister. I remember the sinking feeling in my stomach, realizing they would never, ever believe me over her. That relationship ended under the weight of their disapproval, and the heartbreak was multiplied by the sheer injustice of it all. In that moment, I understood something crucial. My sister had discovered a new weapon, my romantic interests, and as long as she cried wolf, my parents would pin the blame on me, no matter how twisted her stories were. I felt powerless, trapped, and humiliated. After that disastrous breakup, I withdrew into myself. My sister, with her malicious grin, relished every tear I shed. My parents piled on restrictions, claiming they only wanted to protect me from my bad decisions. They clung to the fantasy that my sister was the moral compass of the family, and I was some wayward teen in need of discipline. Locked away in my room, I found solace in textbooks, lecture notes, and practice exams. If my parents or sister wouldn't let me breathe, I would redirect that suffocated energy into achieving something they couldn't take away from me. Academic success. I spent late nights solving math problems, reading novels far beyond the curriculum, and practicing my writing. My laptop, a hand-me-down with sticky keys, became my closest ally. Sometimes, the greatest resilience blooms in the darkest corners. In my case, studying wasn't just an escape. It was the key to unlocking the door that led out of my parents' home. Little did they know, the more they drove me into isolation, the stronger my determination grew. At school, I asked teachers about scholarships, grants, and any financial aid that might help me attend college without relying on my parents. Many teachers, who had seen glimpses of my abilities, were delighted to point me to resources. I joined academic clubs and volunteered in programs that looked good on college applications. Meanwhile, my sister sneered at the idea of me chasing big dreams. She mocked my volunteer work, insinuating that I was only doing it for attention. And perhaps ironically, she started skipping her own classes and complaining about how boring school was. During this time, my only concern was building a future free from their control. I spent weekends drafting scholarship essays, sometimes applying for the most obscure ones, determined to stack every possible deck in my favor. Each acceptance I received was like a lifeline, thrown to me in a violent sea. I hid the letters under my mattress, terrified my sister might rip them up out of spite. No one at home knew how close I was to securing multiple scholarships. They didn't bother to ask. The day would come when my acceptance letter and full scholarship offer arrived. But rather than celebration, it triggered the unraveling of every carefully constructed illusion my parents had about my place in the family. Because once I had that scholarship, their power over me shrank dramatically, and my sister's envy ballooned. My scholarship confirmation landed in my inbox late one night. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred with tears. It felt unreal, like a dream I was afraid to pinch myself out of. In the morning, I printed the acceptance letter, tucked it into a worn-out folder, and braced myself to tell my parents. They were halfway through bragging about my sister's college acceptance to a mid-level institution when I gently broke the news that I too had been admitted somewhere on a full ride. At first, they actually looked pleased. Publicly, how could they not? Their daughter had achieved something significant. Then I saw my sister's face. Thunderous, twisted by jealousy. She realized my scholarship was something she never managed to secure. Even worse, it meant I wouldn't be under their roof for much longer. Suddenly, the charade collapsed. My parents pivoted, voicing concerns that I was too naive to handle real independence, that the college might not be trustworthy. Their protests were feeble. I had proof, recommendations, and the scholarship was from a fully accredited institution. Their panic reeked of desperation, a frantic attempt to keep me tethered at home. My sister fanned the flames, insisting I was being reckless. But my mind was set. I was leaving. I made my plans swiftly. My extended family, particularly a few sympathetic cousins, offered me a couch to crash on if I needed it before dorm check-in. The day I finally packed my bags, there was no heartfelt goodbye. My sister watched from the couch, flipping through her phone like I was nothing more than an annoying neighbor. My parents gave me the faintest hug, cautioning me about how the world was a dangerous place, and I shouldn't come crying if things went wrong. But as my bus pulled away, I felt lighter than I ever had before. For the first time, I was heading toward a life that was mine and mine alone. My tearful eyes looked out the window at the fading silhouette of the town. But deep inside, a spark of hope flickered. I thought I was done fighting the golden child dynamic forever. That glimmer of freedom, however, was just the beginning. Little did I know, the manipulation and the schemes were far from over. Because even with an entire college campus separating us, my sister and parents would find ways to claw back into my life, especially once I announced my engagement. College was a liberating whirlwind. I thrived in my new environment, made friends from all walks of life, and for the first time, truly felt I was in control of my destiny. My professors praised my work, and I joined a study group that pushed me to excel even further. Among all these positive changes, I also met a man who would become my husband. He was straightforward, fearless, and incredibly protective of those he loved. Everything my parents and sister were not. We connected over late-night study sessions, campus events, and a shared desire to carve our own paths. He often teased me for being too accommodating, too quick to back down in an argument. I had to explain that I'd been raised in a minefield where speaking up led to punishment or manipulation. He responded with unwavering support, promising I'd never have to silence myself again. That promise was tested sooner than I expected, because when my boyfriend asked about meeting my family, a knot of anxiety twisted in my stomach. I knew how they'd react, and sure enough, the moment my parents discovered I was dating someone, they demanded to meet him, unveiling a new cycle of drama I never could have anticipated. Despite my lingering fears, I caved and arranged a visit at my parents' house for the weekend. The moment we stepped inside, my father's gaze narrowed. My mother tried to feign warmth, offering forced smiles. My sister didn't even bother with pleasantries. She looked my boyfriend up and down like he was a buffet item, and she was deciding whether he was worth her attention. Their attempt to corner him happened faster than I'd anticipated. Under the guise of getting to know him better, they questioned his intentions and background. My sister maneuvered so that I was left out of these discussions, and when I found him alone in the living room, I could see the tension etched on his face. Later, he confided that they'd been pressuring him to consider whether I was mature enough to handle a relationship. In typical golden child fashion, my sister sat there, smirking, as though enjoying an invisible victory. At that point, my boyfriend recognized exactly what I had been dealing with my whole life. He witnessed how effortlessly my family dismissed my feelings. More importantly, he saw how determined they were to assert control, no matter how irrational it was. But neither of us could have predicted their grand scheme for my eventual wedding, a plot so brazen it seemed almost surreal. Our engagement wasn't a surprise to those who knew us well. We talked about marriage, weighed our finances, and even considered a small courthouse ceremony. I expected to keep the event low-key, maybe inviting only my closest friends. Yet, a part of me still felt obligated to include my parents, if only to demonstrate that I'd moved beyond their tyranny. When I mentioned to them that we were engaged, my mother's eyes widened. My father congratulated us in a flat tone, while my sister pursed her lips. She asked, "So, you're getting married before me?" The question crackled with bitterness. She'd never been able to keep a stable relationship, largely because her manipulative behavior drove people away. Suddenly, it dawned on me that my wedding might become her next target. I should have trusted that instinct, because in the weeks that followed, my parents insisted that we hold the wedding in my hometown. I agreed for the sake of extended family. But beneath that invitation lurked a monstrous demand, one my future husband accidentally discovered when he visited them alone, armed with a voice recorder. The voice recording remains one of the most chilling souvenirs of my wedding journey. My father started by feigning concern, asking about the cost of the venue and the guest list. Then my mother chimed in, delicately suggesting that my sister needed a chance to experience an aisle walk, since she was older and deserved to go first. My husband, baffled, asked what they meant. Step by step, they laid out their plan. My sister would wear a wedding dress at my ceremony, walk down the aisle first, and have her own mini-celebration, complete with pictures and a fancy cake. Hearing the recording later, my stomach twisted. They weren't even subtle. They described how I wouldn't dare make a scene in front of so many guests. They also believed that if they contributed financially to the wedding, I'd be obligated to let my sister have her way. They assured my husband that if I protested, he could calm me down or guilt me into accepting. By the end, I was literally shaking with a blend of anger and heartbreak. Even after all these years, I never imagined they'd stoop so low. Yet, as stunned as I was, my husband saw an opportunity for payback. He insisted we play along, let them finance the wedding, and then expose them in the most spectacular way. For the first time, I felt a spark of excitement at the thought of turning the tables. I'd spent my entire life on defense, but now I would finally go on the offensive. My husband reveled in the planning sessions. He visited my parents often, listening to them elaborate on the scheme, claiming he'd keep everything a secret from me because I was controlling and prone to jealousy. He kept all communications off text, at their request, so there was no written proof. Meanwhile, they financed upgrades to the menu, the photographer, and decor, ensuring that my wedding would be far more elaborate than I'd initially intended. I found it almost comical how eager my sister was to sabotage me. She told my husband she'd been waiting for this moment, her chance to walk down the aisle in a white dress. She believed it would validate her status in the family, overshadowing what she saw as my undeserved happiness. My parents echoed her sentiments, spouting nonsense about how tradition dictated the older sister should be the first to marry. With each new wedding upgrade they insisted on paying for, my husband and I exchanged conspiratorial grins. They thought their money bought them the right to humiliate me, but in truth, they were funding their own downfall. It was a twisted, poetic justice. During this period of deceit, I occasionally worried about the moral implications. Was it right to lead them on, to let them believe their plan would succeed? My husband reassured me that we deserved this after all the pain they'd caused. He reminded me of every instance they'd dismissed or belittled me. This wedding, originally a humble dream, had become a battlefield, and we intended to win. We also enlisted a few trusted friends. One took charge of discreet security arrangements. We hired a guard who would stop anyone from entering the venue in a bridal gown who wasn't me. Another friend volunteered to act as a lookout, ready to intercept my parents or sister if they tried anything early. We even changed the official ceremony time on the invitations, knowing my father would instruct my sister to appear at a specific late bride moment. Every detail was orchestrated to ensure their plan would backfire in the grandest manner. I know this sounds devious, but sometimes you have to fight fire with fire. My sister had tried to sabotage every significant milestone I ever had. My parents had endorsed her every whim. Now, they were about to be blindsided by the very arrogance they'd weaponized for years. The morning of the wedding was a swirl of adrenaline. I woke up early in a nearby hotel, trying to steady my nerves. My husband texted that my parents had been calling him non-stop, confirming trivial details and making sure the aisle and altar were set up for my sister's entrance. Meanwhile, the security guard was briefed and stationed at the venue. My lookout friend was already in place, sipping coffee in a hidden corner, waiting for the drama to unfold. As guests trickled in, they saw a normal wedding. Soft music, elegant decorations, and ushers guiding them to their seats. My parents arrived, took their seats in a place of honor, and surveyed the scene with self-satisfied smiles, clearly believing their plan would proceed like clockwork. My father even checked his watch repeatedly, anticipating that my sister would show up at the right moment, my traditional late entrance. I could almost picture my sister lurking outside, adjusting her veil, waiting for her chance to storm in and steal the show. My hands shook at the thought. Would our plan work? Would security hold firm? Or would my parents raise enough of a stink to ruin everything? Finally, the music signaled the start of the ceremony. The bridesmaids walked down the aisle, followed by the groomsmen. My father rose, presumably to intercept me at the entrance, but I was already there, peeking from behind a side door. A few guests looked around, puzzled that the bride seemed ready right on schedule. My father's phone buzzed, no doubt a message from my sister telling him she was about to enter. He glanced toward the main doors, expecting me to be absent. To everyone's shock, I stepped out in my wedding gown. My father's face froze. The hush that fell over the room was deafening, punctuated only by scattered whispers. Without hesitation, I took a bold step forward. My father panicked, stepping away to answer his phone. In a shaky voice, he mumbled an excuse about an urgent matter and vanished toward the back of the venue. A ripple of confusion moved through the guests. My mother shot up from her seat, following him. For a split second, I felt the sting of abandonment. My own father had left me at the altar to chase after my sister's bizarre fantasy. But then I remembered the bigger picture. The wedding guard was stopping my sister from entering, and soon everyone would see just how low my parents had sunk. By the time my father reached the entrance, my sister was already being confronted by the security guard. She wore a white gown, a lacy veil draped across her shoulders, and clutched a small bouquet she'd apparently brought for her staged photo session. The guard politely informed her that another bride was already inside. She argued, threatened, and even tried bribing him. My father barked that he hired the guard and demanded compliance, but the guard calmly pointed out that he was hired by me and my husband. Then he offered to call the police if they wanted to escalate the situation. Guests started drifting over to see the commotion. The friend who was my lookout jumped into action, feigning shock and horror at my sister's attire. "What are you doing?" she screeched loudly. making sure everyone within earshot understood my sister's intentions. My mother joined in the cacophony, insisting it was all a misunderstanding. The sister, near tears, yelled that she was owed this moment, that it wasn't fair for me to marry first. Cameras flashed, and stunned relatives gaped. People recorded on their phones, capturing everything from my sister's meltdown to my parents' frantic attempts to gain control of the guard. It was surreal and horrifying, but also deeply satisfying. For the first time, their twisted behavior was undeniable, laid bare in front of dozens of witnesses. Back inside, I waited near the altar, confusion playing across my features for the benefit of the crowd. My bridesmaids circled me, whispering support. One of them squeezed my hand, tears in her eyes at the spectacle unfolding. Another quietly said, "You deserve better." I nodded. In that moment, I felt a surge of vindication. All my life, I'd been gaslit into believing I was the problem, that I was too sensitive or resentful. Now, the truth was shining in the open air. My father tried to re-enter, but my husband's best man blocked him, calmly stating that the ceremony was already in progress. My mother tried pushing her way through, claiming they needed to speak to me urgently. Yet, each attempt was thwarted, because as far as the venue staff were concerned, the bride was already walking down the aisle. No second bride was authorized to disrupt the event. People started whispering about how humiliating this was for my parents, being locked out while their daughter actually got married. Part of me almost pitied them, almost. But then I remembered the countless nights I cried myself to sleep, the times they stood by while my sister lied, stole, and destroyed my life. No, this was justice finally served, and I refused to let them sabotage me anymore. I took a deep breath and joined my husband at the altar, escorted by his father. The officiant smiled, offering a few words to calm my nerves. From the corner of my eye, I could still see faint commotion as some onlookers craned their necks toward the back doors, but I forced myself to focus on the man in front of me. My groom, my ally, the one who had meticulously turned my parents' plot against them. As we exchanged vows, the tension melted into relief. For once, my sister wasn't in control. For once, I didn't have to bow to her illusions or my parents' demands. The applause that greeted our first kiss as husband and wife felt like an exorcism of all the years I'd spent locked in that toxic dynamic. Our officiant announced us as a married couple, and the crowd erupted with cheers. Yet, outside, the storm raged on. Word spread among the guests that my sister had come in a wedding dress, that my parents had orchestrated a second aisle walk. The more the story circulated, the more horrified people became. My husband whispered in my ear, "They've revealed their own ugliness to everyone, and we didn't even have to say a word." I couldn't have agreed more. We proceeded to the reception area, a lavish spread my parents had unwittingly paid for, all in the name of their insane plan. Guests milled around, discussing in hushed voices what they had just witnessed. Some offered me tight-lipped smiles, unsure if they should bring up the drama. Others were more direct, hugging me and saying things like, "I'm so sorry, you didn't deserve that." A few were downright furious on my behalf, swearing they'd never look at my parents the same way again. My mother and father eventually snuck in, looking disheveled and humiliated. My sister was nowhere to be seen. Presumably, she'd fled in tears after failing to breach security. My parents attempted a feeble apology, explaining something about how my sister was going through a rough time, but the crowd mostly ignored them. The damage was done. They seemed smaller somehow, their authority stripped away. For once, I watched them squirm under the disapproving gaze of others. Yes, the event had chaos, but it was my wedding. And at last, it was about me, not my sister. In the face of their meltdown, I found clarity. This was my turning point, the day they could never again claim ignorance or twist reality. Their mask had slipped in the most public way possible. In the days that followed, I anticipated a flood of phone calls. My parents tried to reach me repeatedly, leaving voicemails about how I overreacted and misunderstood their intentions. My sister texted me walls of unhinged accusations, claiming my husband had secretly led her on, that she was the real victim. It was both laughable and infuriating to read, but I refused to respond directly. Instead, my husband screenshot everything and posted some of it to a family group chat, accompanied by a brief note. "I'm sharing these messages so everyone understands what we've been dealing with. My wife and I need time to recover from the emotional turmoil they caused on our wedding day. Please respect our privacy." The chat lit up with outrage and shock, but it also garnered messages of support for us. Having spent my entire life under my parents' thumb, I felt liberated by each revelation. No more secrets, no more manipulations behind closed doors. Everything was out in the open. and as the scandal rippled through our relatives, I focused on my new life with my husband, free from their immediate interference. Our honeymoon abroad felt like stepping into another reality. We explored museums, tasted exotic dishes, and slept in cozy hotel rooms that felt like safe havens from all the drama back home. Occasionally, we'd see a missed call from my parents or a cryptic message from my sister. Instead of dread, I felt a surge of relief that their attempts to contact me no longer had power. My husband joked that each missed call was like a badge of honor, proof that we'd successfully distanced ourselves from their insanity. Word reached us through friends that my parents were scrambling to justify their behavior. Some relatives tried to remain neutral, but many were openly horrified. At last, my parents and sister couldn't bury their sins or blame me. Video clips of the meltdown circulated online among family circles. A few of my cousins told me that if my sister tried to paint me as the villain again, they'd be there to correct the record. Imagine the euphoria of walking through ancient cathedrals, strolling by scenic rivers, and realizing that the heavy shackles of your upbringing had been broken. For me, that was the sweetest part of the honeymoon, the knowledge that I had finally, definitively, won a battle I'd been fighting my entire life. When we returned home, life had an unfamiliar serenity to it. Yes, there were still sporadic attempts at contact. My sister threatened to reveal my husband's two-faced behavior, conveniently forgetting that no one believed her. My parents tried sending gifts with apologetic notes, but I saw them for what they were, attempts to re-establish control and smooth over their monstrous actions. My extended family, however, embraced me like never before. Some apologized for not seeing the truth sooner. Others admitted they'd always suspected something was off. My new in-laws, who had witnessed the fiasco firsthand, shielded me with the warmth I had once craved from my own parents. And for the first time, I felt part of a united family that valued me, not just as an accessory to my sister. Yet, even in this new peace, old wounds throbbed. I would sometimes wake from nightmares where my sister stood at the end of my bed, wearing her wedding dress, laughing. I had spent so many years in survival mode. It took time for me to accept that I no longer needed to constantly brace for the next attack. Gradually, I adjusted to a life where I could make decisions without fear of sabotage. My husband and I discussed future plans, buying a home, maybe starting a family someday. The notion that I had the freedom to pursue happiness on my own terms felt almost surreal. I had days where the phone rang, and I tensed up, instinctively anticipating drama, only to discover it was a friend calling to invite me out for coffee. The quieter moments were the sweetest, like waking up on a Saturday morning and realizing I didn't have to check if my sister had set a trap or twisted my parents' minds against me. Instead, I might go for a run or read a novel, simple joys I once took for granted. My husband would sometimes find me deep in thought and ask if I was okay. Yes, I was more than okay. I was finally healing. This was the calm after the storm, but the echoes of thunder remained. I couldn't erase the past, and part of me wondered if my family would ever truly leave me alone. But at least now, I had the choice to let their drama roll off my back. I was no longer captive to their manipulations. Looking back on the entire journey, from my earliest memories of being overshadowed to the catastrophic wedding day, I see a clear thread of cause and effect. My parents planted the seeds of favoritism. My sister watered them with her manipulative cunning, and I was forced to harvest the bitter crop of resentment for years. In a twisted sense, they created the storm that would ultimately wash away their facade. Sometimes people ask if I regret unleashing that public humiliation at my wedding. Did I stoop to their level? Did I let revenge overshadow my own joy? In quieter moments, I grapple with those questions. But then I recall the tears I shed, the heartbreaks I endured, and the repeated betrayal I faced every single time I tried to stand up for myself. Confronting them, on that scale, was the only way I could escape once and for all. The cost was steep. I lost whatever was left of my family's goodwill. My sister will likely never speak to me again without trying to spin some delusional fantasy. My parents might always resent me for exposing their favoritism, but that's a small price to pay for self-respect and peace. Do I wish I had a loving, supportive family that cheered me on without jealousy or manipulation? Absolutely. But life doesn't always give us the families we deserve. Sometimes it gives us the families we learn from, the ones who teach us about boundaries, self-preservation, and the importance of surrounding ourselves with people who genuinely care. In the end, I'm grateful for the clarity this entire saga provided. I see my sister for who she truly is, someone trapped in her own insecurities, never satisfied because she can't stand the idea of sharing the stage. I see my parents as flawed people who let desperation shape their worst decisions. and I see myself as someone who survived despite it all. To anyone who feels like the underdog or scapegoat in their own family, remember this: you can break free. You can reclaim your voice. And in doing so, you might just find the happiness that everyone told you you'd never deserve. That's the real moral behind all of this. My sister tried to claim my wedding aisle. My parents endorsed her outlandish demands, and the entire fiasco erupted in front of countless witnesses. But in a strange, roundabout way, that meltdown was my liberation. It tore down the lies and forced everyone to confront the truth. I had been wronged for far too long. And now, as I step into this new chapter, I carry the knowledge that I no longer live in anyone's shadow. My wedding, once threatened by my sister's pettiness, became the very stage for my emancipation. Some might label it dramatic. Others might be horrified by the spectacle. For me, it was the final push. I needed to stand tall on my own 2 feet. So if you ever find yourself in a similar situation, where a golden child and enabling parents try to shatter your self-worth, believe that there's a way out. It may require cunning, courage, or even a bit of revenge. But your freedom is worth fighting for. Mine certainly was. In the first few weeks after our honeymoon, my husband and I made a conscious choice to limit all contact with my parents and sister. We blocked them on social media, feeling it was best to protect our mental well-being. Strangely, that only seemed to enrage them further. One day, a distant cousin forwarded me a series of rants my sister had posted on an alternative account, filled with half-truths and outright lies. She claimed, among other things, that I had ambushed her at the wedding, staging the entire fiasco to get sympathy points from the rest of the family. She conveniently left out the part where she'd shown up in a white dress or tried to barge in ahead of me. According to her posts, she was the true victim, forced to watch her ungrateful younger sister exploit the parents' generosity. The venom in her words was both shocking and a grim reminder of her deep-rooted envy. You might think a person would show some remorse after an event like that. But my sister went the other way, plunging deeper into self-deception. Perhaps it was her last-ditch effort to maintain a sense of superiority, or maybe she genuinely believed her own tall tales. My parents, meanwhile, alternated between scolding me for cutting them off and pleading for reconciliation. On one hand, they insisted I owed them a chance to explain their side of the story. On the other, they resorted to guilt-laden messages about how much money they had spent on the wedding. My father even suggested we reimburse them since we hadn't honored the arrangement to let my sister walk first. The audacity of that request both enraged and amused me. In one voicemail, my mother's voice trembled as she lamented that our family was breaking apart over a misunderstanding. She insisted that no one ever wanted to upstage me, that it was all a big mix-up. Yet the facts were undeniable. At some point, even the best liars realize they can't bury the truth with mere words. Still, my parents clung to whatever narrative made them feel less culpable. I listened to those voicemails late at night, my heart pounding. Part of me wondered if I should grant them a hearing, if only to gain closure. But then I remembered all the times I'd tried to communicate or reason with them before. They had never once given me the benefit of the doubt. Why should I reward their lies with my time now? While my immediate family spiraled, the extended family rallied around me in unexpected ways. My wedding fiasco had opened their eyes to the dysfunction I'd lived with all my life. They saw how my sister's meltdown wasn't an isolated incident. It was the culmination of years of skewed priorities and favoritism. Some relatives who had once stayed neutral began reaching out with apologies, regrets for not stepping in sooner. My aunt, the one who had tried to mediate when I was a child, became a particularly vocal supporter. She confessed she'd long suspected my parents were enabling my sister's worst traits, but she underestimated just how deeply it ran. Now, she and a few cousins organized family gatherings without inviting my parents or sister. They said it was for my comfort, but it also served as a quiet statement of disapproval towards my parents. For the first time, I felt validated by the adults in my life. It was heartwarming to discover I wasn't alone, that others had noticed the cracks in my parents' facade. And with their support, I felt more empowered to maintain my boundaries. With a newfound sense of camaraderie, I visited some of these relatives more often. We shared stories, updated each other on our lives, and occasionally tiptoed around the wedding drop. They assured me my parents would eventually have to face reality. They couldn't keep spinning the story forever, not when so many people had witnessed the fiasco firsthand. My younger cousins were especially curious, asking me why my sister hated me so much. It was hard to explain that it wasn't simple hate. It was entitlement, jealousy, and a distorted sense of identity. My sister had been elevated to a pedestal since birth, and I was cast as a supporting character in her show. Whenever I broke script, By excelling academically, forming my own relationships, or standing up for myself, she felt threatened. And my parents, ever loyal to their miracle child, fueled that resentment. I found a strange solace in telling the truth openly. No more whispered confessions or coded language to hide the extent of the favoritism. My sister's meltdown had ripped away the polite pretenses, and in that raw aftermath, honesty felt refreshing, even healing. As the tension escalated, I received a letter, yes, an actual physical letter, from my father. Inside was a typed note threatening legal action if I continued defaming the family. He alleged that I was spreading lies about my sister's wedding dress stunt and hurting their reputation. The letter even hinted at seeking damages for emotional distress. My first reaction was shock, followed by a burst of incredulous laughter. How could they sue me for an event they orchestrated? My husband, ever the calm strategist, advised we contact a lawyer just to be safe. The lawyer assured us that such a case would be baseless, especially given the abundant eyewitness accounts and video evidence. In fact, she speculated that my parents likely wouldn't dare take it to court, knowing they would lose spectacularly and further tarnish their reputation. Still, the mere fact they attempted to scare me legally underscored how desperate they were to silence the truth. I couldn't help but marvel at how far they'd fallen in my estimation. Once upon a time, my parents were giants in my world, holding all the power. Now, they were grasping at straws, trying to bully me into erasing a public record of their misdeeds. It was as sad as it was absurd. Rather than cower, I sent a single reply via my attorney. A short letter stating that any further attempts at intimidation would be met with counteraction, and that evidence of their involvement in the wedding stunt was well documented. Then I heard nothing more. Days turned into weeks, and my parents' threat evaporated. In a twisted way, I almost wished they had taken me to court. Imagining them on the stand, confronted with undeniable proof of their complicity, gave me a dark sense of satisfaction. But ultimately, it was better this way. I had no desire to entangle myself in a legal war with the people who should have loved me unconditionally. That's the paradox of escaping a toxic family. You crave vindication, but you also want to move on and heal. Every confrontation stings, even if you win, and I'd already endured enough pain to last a lifetime. Amid the unfolding drama, I heard rumors that my sister's work life was suffering. She'd been hired at the same company where my mother worked, likely through nepotism. But after the wedding incident went viral among local circles, coworkers began treating her differently. Whispers about her behavior, dressing up in a wedding gown to sabotage her own sibling, made her the object of ridicule. One coworker, a distant acquaintance of mine, reached out privately to share that my sister's attitude at work was just as entitled. She demanded special treatment, took extended lunch breaks, and belittled younger employees. The wedding fiasco only amplified existing tensions. Apparently, some people teased her by humming wedding marches whenever she walked by. Others sarcastically asked if she planned to upstage another bride soon. Ultimately, she took extended leave, claiming emotional distress, which many believed was just her avoiding the shame. It was startling to realize how deeply our wedding day fiasco had impacted her public image. For years, I'd been the only one to suffer under her manipulations. But now the world saw what I endured. And in that mirror, my sister found she couldn't hide from herself anymore. According to my acquaintance, my sister complained constantly about how cruel everyone was, how they had misunderstood her intentions. She refused to accept any responsibility, painting herself as a kind soul overshadowed by jealous haters. My mother tried unsuccessfully to arrange a meeting with my sister's boss to defend her, but apparently the boss was aware of the meltdown video and wanted no part in enabling her behavior. Hearing all this left me with mixed feelings. On one hand, I felt vindicated that the broader community finally saw what I had lived with since childhood. On the other, I couldn't help but feel a pang of pity. My sister was so entrenched in her delusions that she might never find a path to genuine self-improvement. Still, my sympathy was tempered by memories of every malicious act she'd ever done, every purposeful attempt to sabotage my life. In the end, I realized that while I could empathize with her downfall, I didn't have to rescue her from it. She was reaping what she had sown, and for once, it wasn't my place to shield her from consequences. My days of sacrificing my own well-being to appease her were over. Time continued to pass, and with each new day, the wedding drama felt more like a distant earthquake whose aftershocks gradually faded. I focused on my career and marriage, attending professional workshops, building friendships, and exploring new hobbies with my husband. We traveled to places we had only dreamed about, capturing countless photos that showed us smiling freely, liberated from the oppression of the past. My relationship with my extended family flourished in a way I never anticipated. Freed from the tension my parents once brought to gatherings, these relatives embraced me wholeheartedly. They watched my sister's meltdown video with disbelief, murmuring regrets that they hadn't intervened in my childhood. I thanked them for their support, but made it clear I wasn't seeking revenge anymore. I only wanted a peaceful life. As the months rolled on, the confidence I gained was staggering. No longer was I the timid girl who walked on eggshells, fearing my sister's next move. I had found my voice, and I was using it not just to defend myself, to lift others up whenever I could. Eventually, I sought therapy to untangle the emotional knots left by my family. My therapist helped me see that while the wedding revenge felt empowering, it was also a reaction to years of stored trauma. She guided me in balancing my need for justice with the importance of healing and moving forward. We worked on strategies to cope with any future attempts by my parents or sister to reassert control. Perhaps the biggest revelation came when my therapist asked if I could picture a future where I forgave them, not for their sake, but for my own. At first, I balked. How could I forgive a lifetime of manipulation, bullying, and public humiliation? But over time, I realized forgiveness didn't mean forgetting or condoning their actions. It meant releasing the hold their negativity had on me. I began to see forgiveness as an internal process, a quiet letting go of the rage and despair they had sparked. In that surrender, I found a deeper sense of peace, a peace that overshadowed even the satisfaction of that wedding day takedown. So here I stand, recounting this saga not to bask in vengeance, but to highlight how one can rise from a well of deeply rooted family dysfunction. My parents and sister spent years trying to clip my wings, to keep me tethered to a life of subservience and low self-esteem. On my wedding day, they attempted their grandest sabotage yet, not realizing they were also igniting the final spark that would burn through every last illusion I had about their good intentions. Our wedding became a spectacle of betrayal on their part and liberation on mine. The meltdown was epic, the fallout was massive, and the family dynamic changed forever. I lost the chance at the kind of parental support every child craves, but I gained the clarity to build a life free from their manipulations. If there's anything to take away from this story, it's that real change often comes at the tail end of a breaking point. Sometimes, you have to let everything shatter so you can pick up only the pieces you actually need. It's messy, it's painful, but it's also how you finally begin to heal. And heal I have. Day by day, I learned to trust my own instincts, to love without fear of sabotage, and to hold onto self-respect with unwavering resolve. My sister may never own up to her actions. My parents might never see the truth of what they've done. But I'm no longer living for their approval, nor am I seeking their validation. The golden chains that bound me to their favor have rusted away. For anyone watching who feels trapped in a similar family dynamic, know that you don't have to remain the scapegoat forever. Your journey to freedom might look different from mine, but the principle remains. You have the right to break away, to defend your joy, and to stand your ground, even if it means calling out those who wronged you in the most dramatic fashion. And that, ultimately, is my final message. Nothing is worth more than your peace. If you have to orchestrate a tactical wedding day revenge to get it, so be it. Just remember, once you claim that freedom, guard it fiercely. Life on your own terms, free from the shadow of a golden child, is a life truly worth celebrating. Thank you for staying until the end of this long, tangled tale. If it resonates with you, I hope it sparks the courage to stand up against the forces that belittle and demean you, whether they're family, friends, or anyone else. May you find your voice, your strength, and your hard-won peace, just as I finally have.